Hey guys, Spence here with Core 4x4. Today we have the JK in the studio and it's almost time to take this thing out wheeling, but before we do that, we really need to put some bump stop extensions on. So we're going to show you how to do that and what goes into selecting the correct setup for your rig. Okay, so for those of you that are new to off-roading or new to modding your Jeep, your bump stop is a very simple but essential part of your suspension setup. It is what limits your up travel and prevents you from hitting your tire on your fender flare, or if you're like me, destroying your tire on your fender liner by cutting it open down the middle, which sucked. It was like really bad. So when you lift your rig and you start to add parts and get more flexibility in your suspension, you get a lot more travel in your wheel. And sometimes you need to limit that so you don't cause damage to your rig. So getting the correct length is a really important step because if you overdo it, you're unnecessarily limiting your up travel and overall performance of your rig. Or if you underdo it, you could still be ripping off fender flares or cutting your tires and just causing more damage than necessary. So today we're gonna get the JK outside, we're gonna do a little flexing, we'll do some measuring and show you how to properly select the correct length for your rig. All right. Okay, so when we first, those tires are loud. When we first lifted the JK and put 40s on it, I did not bump stop it. And I put a slice down the middle of my 40-inch tires. And if you know 40-inch tires, they are like $500 now. So that was an expensive mistake. So now that we have the long arm and the steering and all this stuff, we really need to get out and do some more wheeling. But I'm not gonna cut another tire. So we're gonna get bump stops on. Now, normally we would do our flex tests with just the forklift at the shop, but not everybody has a forklift, so we're just gonna drive up the street here, and I guarantee you should be able to find one of these around your house or around your area, your town or whatever. But if you just go to an industrial park, like you're seeing around us where there's just a lot of industrial buildings, they always have loading bays. And these loading bays always have these nice like makeshift ramps out of concrete. So we're gonna go find one out over here. So having a ramp really helps you get your tire up in the air, allows you to flex until you're touching or hitting or scraping or whatever it may be. And then we're gonna pull our measurement. We don't wanna hit that flare or liner or whatever our tire may come in contact with. That's what we're gonna measure for and limit our travel. So over here, we'll show you this, these nice loading bays. It is a Friday, so there's people here, but if you go on a Saturday to an industrial park, it's gonna be empty and you're not gonna be bothering anyone. But this is a new building, so it's completely empty, except for a few vans. So we're gonna go mess around over here. But ideally, the goal is to get one corner to where you're maxed out. And this Jeep, hopefully these ramps, they have rails on them. Hopefully these ramps go high enough. Well, we'll see. This might not be high enough for the JK. It might be high enough for your rig, but they have these railings on these ones. All right. Well, we're only up 27 inches. This rail doesn't let us get high enough here. All right, let's go try to find another ramp on an older building. Ramp one was a huge fail. It only got our driver's tire up about 27 inches, which is not enough. Oh, got the back tire off, which is not enough for this rig to really max anything out. So we're gonna go look for another ramp. If we can't find something, we'll go back to the shop and we will do, we'll just do the forklift. But basically we wanna max out our flex to where we're hitting something. We still had like 6 or 8 inches on all the corners, so we're gonna go find something else. I want it to rub. And now we're at 34 inches and not rubbing. I think I'm giving up on the ramp. We're just gonna go get the forklift. These 4 more inches isn't gonna make us any more off camber. Just drop that. Cause a little body damage. No. All right. Hop in, guys. Okay, so if you have that issue where you can't find a ramp tall enough, go find a forklift. You could also guess, we did get the rear tire almost tucked. We had about a 1/2 inch. So obviously another 1/2 inch, we could adjust for that. But the front wasn't tucked at all. But we're gonna get the forklift, we're gonna tuck, we're gonna measure where we're hitting, and then we'll pick our bump stop. Let's grab the forklift. Oh, okay, so about 39 inches. We're finally tucked. I don't know, Marissa, you can come over here. This is our point of contact, everything else around the wheel, but the rear portion of our fender here is where we're hitting. All along the front and top, we're good. So we have 2 options with bump stops. We can trim more, get some more up travel, but we're pretty tight all the way around, so I'm not worried about trimming. But right now, let's pull our measurement and see where we're at. This distance right here between your bump stop pad and your bump stop that's on your frame. Now the bump stops we're going to be putting in are going to be an extension of this pad on the axle. So we want to see how much distance we have right here. And between the bump stop and the pad, oh, it's hard to see. We're at about 3 inches. But that rubber is going to compress, so we do have a 4.5 inch lift on here, so I'm going to go with the 4 inch bump stop on the rear. Now let's go look at the front and see if we're even close. So we still got tons of room up here, but it was my front tire that I cut, so I know I can tuck this even more. So we're going to get the forklift to the front now that we have our measurement for the rear, and tuck our tire as far as we can and see where we're at. All right, so we didn't get much further up pulling the front. That back tire finally came off, and I don't want to flip the Jeep over. There's going to be some off-camber situations where you're twisted up where this will actually tuck all the way. I know it's going to happen because I've done it. So what we're going to do is we're going to just look around and just see how close we are on anything. And we're about 5 inches. 5 inches till we're hitting the flare, and those are our 2 closest points. We probably got, actually our flare mount right here, 4.5 more inches. This right here is probably our closest point because I have trimmed my front fender. That's where I cut it originally. That's got 5 inches, and right here is about 4.5 inches. So we're just gonna add 4.5 inches to our distance. Now, Marissa, if you wanna come around to the front. Okay, so now that we're up here, this is a good place to show. So we got about 4.5 more inches, and we probably smash our coil. And what we're measuring is between our bump stop here, I don't have a bump stop in, but our bump stop mount and our bump stop pad, which is about 8 inches. And we really have 4.5 inches before we're gonna hit that fender piece. So we're going to subtract that from our 8 inches, which means we probably need 3.5 inches, 3 inches of bump stop up here. And to play safe, we could go with the longer bump stop, but I think we're going to do the 3 inch bump stop on the front. We have so much more room for up travel before we hit anything. Now, another thing I wanted to show while we're under here. Now, there's a lot of bump stop kits that just have the extended puck that goes on the axle side here. I don't love those options because, as you can see, that puck would be pointing into my frame or into my coil and not really lined up with my bump stop that comes from the frame. So as opposed to extending your bump stop at the axle, I really prefer to extend your bump stop at the frame. It just gives you a much better alignment on your coil and just functions a lot better, especially when you're getting in these extreme off-camber situations where your axle is getting tucked up and angled over. Extending from the frame makes better contact than extending your axle side. Now you can do a combination of both. Today we're just going to do the frame extension, but we'll probably go a 3-inch in the front, 4-inch in the rear, and that should limit us enough. And when we take it off-roading next week, we can test all this and see if we hit anything. So let's get it back in the studio. We'll get some bump stops on, and have a good place to start. All right, so we're back in the studio now. That did not quite go how I planned. I may have picked the wrong Jeep for this video, but this Jeep needs bump stops before we got off-roading. We were at almost 40 inches on the forklift and still didn't tuck the front, which is good. It's all good news, but like I said, I know I've cut a tire on this Jeep and I don't want to do that again. I've done a ton of trimming, so we have lots of clearance. I'm gonna go with the 3-inch. I was anticipating putting 3-inch bump stops on this Jeep anyways. That's why I did it in orange. We may need the 4-inch, but we'll find out next week when we take this rig off-road and try to get it off camber as much as we can, or try at least tuck to where we're close to rubbing or where we do hit the bump stop. So in front of me I have our 2-inch. These are our front. These work on the JK, the JL, and the JT for the front. All the front fit all 3 of those Jeeps. We will have options for the rear on the JT as well. But we got the 2-inch, the 3-inch, and the 4-inch. We'll get this up in the air. We are gonna have to remove our coils for the front. That's the hardest part of this install. Otherwise, on the rear, it's just 2 bolts. Slapping these on is pretty straightforward, and then we'll go for a ride next week. But let's get this in the air, and we'll show you how to do that. All right, so the rear bump stop installation is a very straightforward, super easy install because you're just adding to your bump stop pad here on the back. But I did want to take a second and talk about orientation. You do want the angle on whichever side you're using to go towards the front of the vehicle. That's to compensate for any sort of lengthening of your control arms or stretching in the rear. As your suspension cycles, your axle moves backwards, so this angle is just to compensate for that and to line up with your bump stop a little better. So angle towards the front. Honestly, we probably need the 4-inch bump stop back here, but I'm going to be stubborn because I powder coated this one orange and put the 3-inch on, because you can always trim more, right? So our point of contact was the rear of the fender liner back here, so if we need to trim more after next week's wheeling trip, we will. But we're going to throw the 3-inch on, and these just line up with your factory mount holes, and you just bolt them in with the hardware provided. The torque spec is 25 foot-pounds, so we'll get these bolted in and then we'll move on to the front. Before we move on to the front, I was going to take a minute and talk about shock length, which we haven't talked about yet. Your shocks, though, once you get a good flexible control arm under there, good flexible track bar, extended brake lines, and your bump stop correctly, usually your shock ends up being your next limiting factor. So once you're bump stopped to where you like it and trimmed to where you like it, and you have all the up travel that you want, you can start looking at your shocks to see if you need to go longer, shorter, what have you. Basically, you're gonna tuck like we did for the bump stop measuring to check our travel. And you basically want maybe a 1/2 inch to a 1/4 inch, really not that much. You want basically your shocks completely compressed at your max up travel. That way you can get the most down travel. So if you tuck and you're not all the way up, and sometimes you can tell based on how much dirt, because your shock will usually be clean in your range of travel. Right here, when we tuck, it looks like we go basically to the end of our shock, which is exactly what we want. If it wasn't that case, we could move up and down on our shock mounts here, or we could go with a longer shock. Now, a longer shock is going to give you more down travel, more flexibility off-road, and you can get a lot more out of your rig. So bump stopping and getting the correct shock for your setup is really important in maximizing your travel and your flexibility off-road on any rig. But there's only so much you can do with the coil sprung suspension. This setup on this JK It's basically the most travel we are going to get out of a coil sprung suspension. Next, we will be moving to coilovers to give us some more range and flexibility there. So stay tuned for that. But for a coil sprung suspension, proper bump stops, proper shock length, all that's really important to get the max travel out of your lift kit. All right, that's it for the rear. Again, really simple. We're done here, so let's move on to the front and get the front ones installed. Okay, so now we're on to the front. It's a couple more steps to get the bump stop extension installed. We do need to be able to access our puck here, or case or tube. So to do that, we do need to remove the coil. And on this Jeep, our limiting factor is our shock. So we need to remove our shock. So I'm going to get some jack stands under here just to make sure our axle isn't falling out from under us. We still have the track bar and drag link that is holding on, and all the arms obviously, but our shock is going to limit our down travel. So when we take that off, we're going to have a lot more down travel to pull this coil out. So usually it is nice if you're doing a lift kit to do this before you put the coil in and put everything back together. We're doing it backwards, so we're going to take the shock off, take the coil out, and then we'll bolt in our new extension and get that all buttoned up. Okay. All right, so normally you'd have your factory rubber actual bump stop in here. This Jeep didn't have it, so you would have to remove it for the step, and then the new extension just bolts up right inside here, and we'll bolt it from the top, and then we'll put our new rubber in. And this is an option with the kit if you want new rubber, or you can reuse your factory rubber if it's in good shape. Okay, so we're just going to put a little bit of, we're going to make a little, you can use a glob of grease or some tape like this, but the hardest part of this install is to get this bolt all the way down in and lined up with the hole, which isn't that hard. We're just going to kind of tape it to the inside of our socket. So the washer's a little easier to line up. We'll just drop it in there and line the washer up from the bottom. Oh, look at this cute little screwdriver. There, our washer's lined up. Bolts in. Let's get this tight. That is 120 foot-pounds. All right, let's get our there we go. Get our coil back in. This might be a little hard. Now we got this extension. Nope. Guess we can go higher.
Be careful.
Yep. Dylan's nervous. It's still holding. My brake lines aren't loving it. There we go. Okay, we're gonna get another jack stand. Oh, I got like the perfect height the first time. All right, passenger side's done. It's nice and easy on a really flexible Jeep like this because you don't have to disconnect your track bar. We don't have sway bars and anything else. But if you're doing this at home on your factory Jeep or one with a different setup, you're probably gonna have to detach your sway bar and maybe even your track bar in order to get your coil out. But for us, it's just the shock. So passenger side's done. We got the new bump stop extension in. We're gonna do the driver's side now. There we go. Okay. Okay guys, that wraps it up for the bump stop install. We are gonna go wheeling next week, so we will check all of this and make sure we got the right length. We may be a little short, but I prefer trimming, at least on this rig, as opposed to more bump stops, just to get us our maximum amount of travel out of our suspension. Now for this Jeep with the long arm kit and all the crawl series on it, this is about as flexible as you can get with a coil sprung suspension. So we're kind of maxed out on our articulation for this rig until we go to coilovers and we can get a bit more travel. Okay guys, stay tuned for next week's video when we take this out on the trail and test out our new bump stops and see how everything does. Please comment, like, subscribe. That all helps us out in the videos we're doing, and we'll catch you in the next one.